Hello, how are you doing? Today I am going to do the mid-year check-in tag, which I really enjoy doing every year as a way of checking in on how I'm doing with my reading goals and looking at some of the best things I've read this year and some of the worst things I've read this year. And I'm going to do a slight spin on this tag in that I'm adding a couple prompts at the end of it. Usually there's like a set number of questions that I do every year, but I always get slightly frustrated in that there are some things I would rather be answering and that are slightly more relevant to me. And I always feel with like a tag, but like, oh, I need to stick to the prompts that are given. But I mean, obviously I can do whatever I want because this is my own video and my own channel. And so, yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of doing this before. So I've added a couple more questions at the end of this, ones that I think are sort of interesting personally for me that I want to answer. But if you want to do this tag, it'd be lovely to hear your responses to it. If you just want to answer the questions, all of the questions or some of the questions in the comments below, I'd really enjoy hearing your answers as well. And I always do the mid-year check-in tag rather than the more popular mid-year freak-out tag that a lot of people do on book tag, because I don't like this sense of sort of freaking out about what we're reading and this creating this kind of stress around the reading process, which should be just enjoyable and for fun and shouldn't be this kind of competitive thing, like not so much with each other, although that can happen on booktube of competing of who's reading more and stuff, but more competing with ourselves, I think, which us readers do quite a lot in terms of like our scope of what we want to read usually is much less than what we actually are able to read, because reading is such a time consuming thing. And so I think it's just much better to be like chilled about the whole reading process and not get too hung up on things. And though the first question about this sort of adds to that kind of sense in that it's asking how many books have you read so far this year. And so usually I don't like to focus on numbers so much since, yeah, like I said, reading isn't a competition and it's not really about the numbers. It's about the quality, not the quantity of what you're reading. But for the sake of this, I did go through and tot up how much I've actually read. So I've read 62 books in total this year, which isn't like complete. I mean, some books I've started and not finished yet, and other books like it'll be like a book of short stories, so I've read some of the short stories but not all of them yet, and yeah, that sort of thing. So but yeah, that I've actually completed is 62 books, which is slightly more than I normally read, I think, at this time of year. But I think it's partly of this new thing I've been doing. Like I talked about at the beginning of the year, I made a video talking about how I've been reading more, even more than usual lately, and I think that's because I've been combining doing some of these different techniques of like reading aloud to my partner, but also of reading physical books while I'm at home, but then reading audiobooks while I'm out walking or out doing something or while I'm exercising. And this is just like adding to the amount that I've been reading this year so far. So yeah, 62 books. It's quite a lot. Question 2 is, what is your favorite book that you've read this year? And that's really difficult to answer. Like I talked about in the video I made of my favorite books so far this year, I don't really like ranking them or saying one is better than the other. I mean, sometimes one is an absolute standout this year, but I would say there are so many of those like 10 books that I talked about that I think are really great and good in so many different ways from each other. But if I was forced to pick one over all of the others, I would probably say it's Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. Just the novel is so artfully done, and it raises so many different issues that are both personal and pertinent to larger society that I think it's a tremendous book. And for her second novel, I think, is such an incredible achievement, even though there was quite a long time in between Homegoing and this new novel. And but I think it's great that she took her time with it and really developed it, and that really comes through in what a tremendous and moving and heart-wrenching and thought-provoking story this is, and you know, all the superlatives. Question 3 is, what is the most disappointing book you've read this year? So dishing the dirt on this, but actually this is a very easy answer for me. My most disappointing book is definitely, without a doubt, no hesitation about this, is The War of the Poor by Eric Villard, which was listed for the International Booker Prize. I've already talked smack, shoveled a lot of dirt, all of those things about this book already. It is such a short book. It's probably one of the shortest books I've read so far this year, but it's absolutely the most disappointing in that it just doesn't tell you all that much about its subject, or doesn't do it in a very creative or interesting or engaging way. And it's looking at this issue, I mean, I sort of sympathize with it in a lot of ways, of looking at this issue of why there are so many poor in this society, why there's been imbalance in society for centuries and throughout all time, that there are some people that are underprivileged and other people that are definitely overprivileged, and but it's more just like raising this point and putting it out there. And I realize, I know that it's sort of mimicking the style of a kind of pamphlet that might have been written in this time hundreds of years ago, and the time around Thomas Muntzer, and how he was conveying this idea to society at the time, but you need to build upon that. You need to say something and get more into the nuance of why this is occurring, because just stating that fact is like, well, yeah, that's a really obvious point to make, and I don't understand the acclaim that this book has been getting, or why it was especially meaningful to other people. It just, I mean, I don't know. It just baffles me. Question 4 is, what genre have you read most this year? And I have the same answer for that, because it's the kind of fiction I always read is kind of depressing literary fiction is how I would classify it. Although I think that's slightly misleading, because there's so much about these, so-called like depressing stories that I read that I find so enlightening and life affirming and enhancing, and it's obviously why I go back to reading these books rather than just I want to read a depressing story or get depressed myself. And I think it's because I have a slight temperament, which doesn't really come through a lot when I'm making my videos, of that I can get depressed quite a lot and feel really down about things, and I know I always sound so like cheery and upbeat and perky on my videos, but I think that's because I'm talking about books, and when I talk about books I get so happy and excited, because I find them such a respite from the slightly darker aspects of reality. And not to be like too like gloomy about it, but really that's how I feel, and why I come across as like so smiley and happy, and it's just, yeah, it's slightly weird that slightly when I'm making videos, and I think the perception of me is probably a lot cheerier than I actually am in normal life, and it's a weird, like, strange thing about making videos like this. Question 5, what is a new favorite author that you have discovered this year? And I would pick Tori Peters. Detransition Baby was such a powerful, moving, massive swirling chaos of a story that I got so engaged and gripped by, and so I think it's an incredible author. I think she's published a couple of books before, like slightly shorter books or like novellas with smaller presses, and so I'd be really keen to seek some of those out, but I hope she continues to write and publish more, because I'm so interested in this new perspective that this author gives. I think it's an incredible new insight, and a really engaging and exciting one, and an enjoyable one too. I had so much fun reading this book, as well as finding it, a really heartrending experience in a lot of way, and also a really enlightening one. Question 6 is, what is the most surprising good new book that you've read so far this year? And for that I'd answer Cathedral by Ben Hopkins, which is quite a long novel, and I finally just got around to reading it recently, and I was slightly putting it off, slightly because it is such a long novel and a commitment to read, but also because it's a historical novel set in the 1200s, and I thought maybe it might be a slightly dry story, but it's not a dry story at all. It's a really riveting one with very distinct cast of characters that you follow over a period of many years, and you see the evolution of some of these characters. A lot of them don't make it because of the time period and the chaotic events that were happening at the time. But also, yeah, the way he like builds this larger story about a changing society, I found it so involving. And this is a book I had to make a second go of because I started reading it. I got around 100 or so pages into it, and I got a bit lost because there are quite a lot of characters and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of historical detail, but then I went back and started again, and I found it such an enriching and involving experience. And I had to make a list of characters to like keep track of who everybody was, and I'm sort of glad I did that because yeah, it really helped me figure out who everybody was and keep track of things. But yeah, it's a wonderful experience. I loved it so much. Question 7 is, what are your most anticipated 2021 releases of books that are still to come out? And there's quite a lot of them. I was looking through this pile of books that I've been sent in advance and looking through lists of books that are coming out later this year. There are so many really exciting ones to come. I ought to make a whole separate video about that because yeah, there's a lot to look forward to, but I picked out 3 that I'm going to discuss. So first off, there is Breathe by Joyce Carol Oates, which of course, because it's Joyce Carol Oates, I'm so excited to read her new book. This is, I think, about an academic that experiences a grief and loss in their life and about their life going forward. So looking at that. Then next there is Sugar by Bernice L. McFadden, and this is an author that I discovered over the course of the Women's Prize for Fiction when she was longlisted a couple years back, and I thought her novel was so striking and interesting, and so I was really excited by this author's voice and made me want to read more by her. So I'm very happy that there's a new novel by her coming out. And then there is The Magician by Colm Toibin, and this is a novel about the author Thomas Mann, and I've talked in the past about how I love books that are about authors' lives and going into authors' lives, and how he's done this before, looking at the life of Henry James, and how he did that was so amazing that I'm really eager to read his take on Thomas Mann's life, though I haven't read all that much or barely anything by Thomas Mann before, which is bad, and I have been wanting to get to reading his fiction, but I have read his novel The Death in Venice, which I think this novel is sort of centered around, and why there's the cover of this like this. Question 8 is, what is your next big priority for your reading? And I would answer this novel, A Passage North by Anouk Arund-Pagrasam, and this is a new novel which is just coming out, and it's the story of a man that returns back to his homeland in Sri Lanka when his mother's carer dies, but then also meets another figure from his past and gets involved with the larger politics of what's occurring in the country. And so following that story, and this author and this book has been much lauded, and so yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this story. And speaking of Colm Toibin, he gives a little quote on the back for this novel where he says, while the narrative is filled with images of violence and loss, at its center is an exquisite form of noticing, a way of rendering consciousness and handling time that connects Arund-Pagrasam to the great novelists of the past. So speaking of great novelists from the past, I mean, maybe one day Colm Toibin will write a novel about this author's life. Question 9 is, what has been your bookish highlight of the year so far? And I guess because of the way this question is worded, it's not necessarily about a single book, but is about your sort of bookish experience in general. And probably my favorite bookish experience of the year is being involved in the Costa Book Awards and being a judge for the first novel category of that prize, and picking the novel Love After Love as our winner, and seeing all the excitement around that, but also the novel Monique Roffey's novel The Mermaid of Black Conch winning the overall Costa Book Award prize for her novel, and so yeah, it was really exciting and wonderful to see that. How I would pick my favorite bookish experience, as opposed to what I would pick as my favorite novel of Yaa Gyasi's novel, I would pick the book Real Estate by Deborah Levy, her living autobiography that she's been publishing. This is the third volume of that, and it's just such a pleasure to read this book. I mean, I just got so swept up in it and wrapped up in it, and was like wishing that Deborah Levy was my eccentric auntie that was having these experiences, and the way she writes about her life, she gives such like a glamour to otherwise unglamorous circumstances, and I just love that about her experience. So this was just such a pleasure to read. Now I'm gonna have a couple of other prompts that I'm adding myself because they're ones that I want to answer and that I'd be really interested in hearing other people answer, but which aren't actually asked in the tag, but yeah, I'm just going to put them on because I want to. And so first off, I'm going to have the prompt of what's a book you started this year and still really want to finish. And so for that, I have to say Mordu by Alex Feby, which is quite a long novel that I started and only got 140 or so pages in. I've got my bookmark there, and that I really want to go back to and finish, but have this dilemma, which I do quite a lot with long books, and that sometimes I'll start them and be involved in them, but get slightly distracted because there's other books I want to read as well. And so I think like, oh, I'll just read this other book and then go back to this, and then that happened with this book, and I just haven't gone back to it yet, and I still want to, and I want to finish reading it because it took a little while to get into it's a really imaginative sort of fantasy story, but with quite like serious themes and quite like really interesting ones, and I was just really getting into it when I then allowed myself to get distracted, and I need to get back to it because it is a really fascinating book. And then the other extra prompt I want to give is, what is the best classic book you've read this year? I'd love to know from people a classic book you've read that you've really loved, because I've been getting more into reading classic books in the past couple of years, and my answer for it would be Dr. Thorne by Anthony Trollope, who's an author I've been getting so much into in the past several months. I started reading him towards the end of last year, and it's such a joy to read. I mean, I can see why some people find Anthony Trollope's writing a bit dry and boring, because the plot of his books I think aren't the most important things about them. I think the best thing about his writing is the characterization, the wonderful characters he creates, but also the issues that he looks at in ways of giving this like a new view of society, and his authorial position in writing about these stories. Like he does such an interesting thing of like intervening as an author and as a narrator at some points, and then other times getting swept up in the story, and you still really care about these characters and these situations. And so this is the third book, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, third book in the Barchester Chronicles, and I'm so looking forward to reading more of these books. I sort of think of Anthony Trollope as like a treat I can get to after reading other books, which is like a weird thing to think about him, but yeah, I want to pace myself, and even though there's a huge amount of Anthony Trollope books, but so I don't think I'm gonna run out anytime soon, but yeah, I want to take my time in getting to them and really enjoying these books when I can. And then the final prompt is, who do you tag? And like I give with all these tags, I would say everyone. If you have your own channel and want to make your video response to this, I would love to hear your answers. If you do make a video, put a link to it in the comments below so I can go watch it. I'm not sure, I've been watching a lot of these videos anyway, but if you don't have your own channel and just want to give some of your answers to some of these questions or all of these questions in the comments below, I'd really enjoy hearing your answers, because yeah, I think it's a fun thing to check in with each other about how we're getting along with our reading goals for the year, but not in a competitive way, not making it competitive. But I hope you've been reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.